Well, welcome everyone. This is Jennifer Richter from Aiken Gantz. I help to lead our advanced aviation practice here, and we're really excited to be with you today as part of our advanced aviation webinar series that our team has put together to keep industry connected during these very uncertain times. So big thanks and shout out to Cliff Sweet and Justin Tolles for doing that. Today's first session for our webinar series is on the state of the advanced aviation industry. We've got a great group of speakers for you today, starting with PK, who is the director of NARI, the NASA Aeronautics Research Institute, and a friend to us all, and someone I'm sure that's well known to all of you, who really helped to give birth to this industry. Jenny Rosenberg, the Executive Director for the Alliance for Drone Innovation, Tom Mcmahon, Senior VP of Advocacy and Government Relations from AUVSI, and Andrew Giafini, Governmental Affairs and Outreach for the FAA. Really terrific group who I think are going to share some important perspectives for you about where we are in the advanced aviation industry today. I hope you'll also tune in to our next two sessions. We have session 2 on July 15th, and that's going to focus on the future of global unmanned aviation. I think we're going to be doing kind of a behind the scenes look at how IATA, ICAO, Eurocontrol harmonize standards, and also interview some operators in Kenya and Canada who are flying humanitarian missions. So that's going to be really interesting. And then our final session in our webinar series will be on July 29th, and that's going to focus on the foundational policies for advanced air mobility. A topic on which we've all been working hard, both inside Aiken Gump and with our clients, and I'm sure important for all of you. So thanks again for joining us today. I'm going to hand over now to Cliff Sweet to help kick off today's session. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. 2020 started out with a lot of hope on the UAS side of aviation. The Remote ID NPRM, a gateway to advanced UAS authorizations, received over 53,000 comments. NASA was moving out with their CONOPS and community workshops, but in the second week of March, NASA postponed their workshop and others quickly followed. Borders closed and quarantine became a new travel standards. Work from home was a new required path for us getting things done. The aviation industry has been hit very hard with passenger loads collapsing to as low as 70–80% when compared to 2019. The loss of revenues for the U.S. alone is over hundreds of billions of dollars for 2020. But no need for us to lay out the details of the trials and opportunities. We've got a very qualified panel here to do that for us. In order to give us a sense of where we are today, I'm going to hand it over to Justin to introduce the panel members. Justin.
Yeah, thanks so much, Cliff. As Cliff mentioned, we have a phenomenal panel that we've put together for everyone today with expertise across industry, multiple sectors of government, and also, with a lot of experience from the larger firms in the industry as well. So first, I'll introduce Jenny Rosenberg. Thanks for being with us, Jenny. Jenny currently runs JTR Strategies and the Alliance for Drone Innovation. But previously, as many of you know, Jenny served as Assistant Secretary of Transportation for Aviation and International Affairs, and prior to that was also at the FAA as the Associate Administrator for Communications. And prior to that, she had several stints on Capitol Hill, working in commerce, running communications as well. We also have Andrew Giafini. So Andrew is the Government Affairs and External Outreach Advisor at the FAA currently. Prior to that, he also came from Capitol Hill, where he served as a Senior Legislative Assistant to Representative Jason Lewis and also to former Chairman John Mica. Then we have Tom Mcmahon. Tom is the Senior Vice President of Advocacy and Government Relations at the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, AUVSI, where he's been working for the past number of years on all issues related to unmanned systems. Prior to that, he had stints at Motorola in senior roles there, and also at CenturyLink and Quest Communications. And last but not least, we have Pierre-Marc Coppadekar from NASA and head of the NASA Aeronautics Research Institute, NARI. PK, everyone knows, is the father of UTM and has been extremely active in UAS integration for the past several years, and is now also starting to take more heavily of a focus in advanced air mobility, or urban air mobility as we call it as well. So like I said, we have an amazing panel set up here, so I'd like to turn to them as quickly as possible. So first we'll kind of set the tone here by asking each one of the panelists just to give us an overall sense of kind of where is the industry today, what is the state of the aviation industry, and where do we see it going? And we'll go down the line, but we'll start with you, Jenny.
Thank you, Justin, and to Cliff and Jennifer and the team at Aiken Gump for hosting this webinar and for having me today. Before I jump into my remarks, I just want to acknowledge that it's been a very difficult time for our country, and I think that this has been a time for introspection, and certainly the aviation industry is working very hard to step up and support our communities and to support our workforce. It is a responsibility that I think all of our companies take very seriously. And not only that, but also the safety of our passengers, especially in the commercial sector. And then in the cargo sector, you've seen the companies step up and really show the power of cargo to our homes through e-commerce. It's been incredible just to watch all of our industries step up during this time. As Justin mentioned, I have the great honor of serving as the executive director of the Alliance for Drone Innovation. And then I also, in my consulting business, represent airlines and have been able to see both sides of the pandemic's impact on our industry. For those of you who don't know the Alliance for Drone Innovation, we are the successor to the Drone Manufacturers Alliance, and we represent many of the manufacturers and parts manufacturers to drones. And then we also have the Drone Operators Federation, which is now headed by Dan Burton of DroneBase, and their amazing network of drone operators. So what we've seen is how the business community within the drone industry is innovating and supporting businesses, whether it's through inspections, through sanitization. There's just so many innovative uses for drones, and it's been wonderful to see people innovate and continue to work during this time. We, of course, want to make sure that we have policies in place that support the smaller drone businesses, because that's the backbone of our commercial industry. On the passenger and cargo side, my clients have been hit in many different ways by the pandemic. Of course, on the passenger side, we saw BTS data showing incredible drops in passenger numbers this spring, and it has been really breathtaking. All of the passenger industry has been very grateful to the administration for their support through the CARES Act, but we will see when travel starts to come back. We're seeing some gains in the leisure sector, but the corporate sector continues to be down, and that will just continue to have reverberations throughout the industry for many, many, many months to come. So with that, Justin, thank you. I hope that was a good introduction. I'll let someone else take the floor now.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much, Jenny. Great insight there. Tom Mcmahon from AUVSI. Tom, you're up.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate you having me on the panel today with Jenny, Andrew, and PK, a great lineup of people who are working in the unmanned systems industry and is moving this technology forward. And I also want to thank the crew over there at Aiken Gump, Jennifer and Cliff and Justin. Thanks very much for having me on the panel today, and looking forward to the discussion about unmanned systems. AUVSI is the Association for Unmanned Systems International, and we've been around for more than 40 years. In fact, we're approaching 50 years from when we were first founded back in 1972. And during that time, we've, of course, experienced a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges. And no doubt that's where we find ourselves today. But taking a look at where the unmanned systems industry is, and as we were going into the beginning of the year, as Cliff had pointed out, AUVSI is also focusing on some other areas to gauge where the industry stands. One of those areas is on Part 107 waivers. We did a study recently at AUVSI on the waiver process and found that there had been more than 4,000 waivers granted by the FAA for extended operations since Part 107 was established back in 2016. And most of these waivers are for operations at night, but we're also seeing an increase in waivers for operating over people and in controlled airspace. And most of the waivers have gone to commercial operators. In fact, about 72% of the waivers were granted to commercial operators, but about 20% of the waivers have been granted to law enforcement agencies. The waivers also have been granted for demonstrations that have shown the different capabilities of unmanned systems, whether that's operating, as I said, over people or even beyond visual line of sight. And while these increases in waiver authorizations are certainly welcome, the waivers are not a long-term solution or a substitute for regulations that will expand extended operations to occur on a regular and routine basis. So we're looking forward to the remote ID NPRM being finalized by the end of the year, as the FAA has indicated, and then moving on to other regulatory regimes as well, taking a look at flights over people as well as flights beyond visual line of sight, which will extend these operations even further and advance the industry even more. Another area that we look at is with state UAS laws. This is an area that I personally have been involved in and have traveled around the country at the beginning of the year visiting different state legislatures and state capitals and talking to lawmakers there about their views on unmanned systems. Since 2016, there have been 44 states that have enacted UAS-related laws, and just in this past year, in 2019, there were 22 bills in 18 states that became law. Now, many of these bills have addressed concerns about privacy, trespassing, and voyeurism, which often can be addressed in existing state laws. Increasingly, we're seeing states that are passing laws that impose airspace restrictions over critical infrastructure such as prisons, hospitals, schools, sports arenas, energy production facilities, and manufacturing plants. This makes the need to establish a federal regulation concerning flights over critical infrastructure even more important to provide a certainty and a unified policy on this matter instead of a confusing patchwork of state and local laws that will confuse operators and compromise airspace safety. So it's another reason why we're looking forward to the FAA coming out with a proposed rule later this year referred to as Section 2209, which was the part of the FAA Extension Act of 2016 that will address flights over critical infrastructure. Looking ahead, we're seeing states that are gaining a better appreciation for the economic and societal benefits that are provided by unmanned systems. We're seeing many states now that are funding flight training and workforce development programs so they can become more competitive and attract even more businesses to their states. And looking ahead to advanced air mobility systems, state and local governments are anticipated to have a larger role in unmanned systems policy with regard to takeoff and landing facilities in which they'll be determining. The location of airports and heliports is an authority the FAA has provided to local governments, and that likely will be the case for determining drone ports in the future. Also, state and local leaders will need to find a trusted and reliable source of information on unmanned technologies to enable them to make these determinations about unmanned operations that are within their jurisdiction. So it will be incumbent upon those of us who are involved in the industry, whether we're in the private sector or with government or with educational institutions, to provide information about these technologies. And as I mentioned, remote ID is certainly going to be an important factor in the industry moving forward, and so will UTM systems. And this information will give lawmakers the confidence they need to permit these operations in their states, districts, cities, counties, and towns. And finally, an area that AUVSI focuses on is on safety and safe operations. A few years ago, we created the Know Before You Fly program with the FAA and the Academy of Model Aeronautics to promote safe and responsible flight operations, whether it was by commercial operators or hobbyists. Today, we have nearly 200 supporters of the Know Before You Fly program, and it's been recognized by 6 state legislatures. We also started the Trusted Operator Program, or TOP, and that's to certify professional UAS pilots based on their proficiency and ability to safely conduct extended operations, such as those requiring the waivers that I mentioned earlier, or for specific industries with complex flight requirements, such as the oil and gas industry. Colleges and universities such as Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and Virginia Tech are using the top program in their curricula so students can become certified as UAS pilots upon successful completion of their coursework. So those are just some of the areas that we're looking at AUVSI to gauge the industry and where it's moving forward. I think we've certainly seen some challenges during the pandemic, but they've been addressed by many of our members. Specifically, I think there's been a lot of news coverage about delivering medicines and healthcare products to senior citizens who are safely staying at home during the pandemic, but it's been a real benefit to them to have these essential services being delivered to them. And we're also seeing public safety using unmanned systems during this time as well for their operations. So I think that on the one hand, certainly the pandemic poses some challenges from an economic standpoint, but on the other hand, in times of emergency, I think that you'll find that people turn to technology to help them sort things out. So I look forward to talking to you some more about this and the rest of the panel. So back to you.
Thanks so much, Sean. Appreciate it. Now we'll turn to Andrew Giafini to give us a little bit of perspective from the FAA.
Thanks, Justin and Cliff. Appreciate you guys putting this on and for all the different panelists for coming together for this discussion. It's a pleasure to be with you. So my name is Andrew Giafini. I'm an advisor to the FAA administrator out of the Government and Industry Affairs Office at the FAA. My office is the liaison to both Congress as well as our interagency partners, and we also consider the needs of stakeholders in the aviation industry as the FAA advances its work. I think both you at the start and then Jenny referenced the fact that there's quite a bit of hardship right now, not only domestically but globally for the transportation industry at large, and then obviously the aviation sector. The U.S. government as a whole continues to provide guidance and assistance to protect the health and safety of the public, the traveling public, industry, and obviously our own workforce, so that we can continue doing our safety work. I'm certain we will see change in the future based on the lessons learned of the current experiences that we're all going through. But I have to say that from the FAA's point of view, outside of the market conditions and probably investments and things like that in the UAS communities, from the FAA's perspective, we have not seen the COVID environment detract really from the FAA's work as it pertains to UAS rulemaking, nor our ability to provide avenues for operations. We continue to consider and issue exemptions and waivers across the country for new operations, and our existing 107 rules, as Tom pointed out, enable the vast majority of small UAS operations that occur today. And we're seeing package delivery for compensation conducted under 107, within the visual line of sight of pilots. And meanwhile, the FAA continues to work with our 9 lead participants in the IPP as we work towards closing out that program in October 20 of this year, in line with the congressional direction in the last FAA reauthorization. And we continue to work with the lead participants as they look to pursue increased operations. One of the things I'll say about IPP is it's been extremely successful. We're very appreciative, with this White House initiative, and the FAA has gained a good deal of information because of it. And we look forward to issuing our final report later this year after the close of the IPP. And I will definitely say that while we look forward to putting that report out, I'm certain it will identify places where there's still more that we need to know and more that we need to pursue. BV loss and understanding the societal benefits, as Tom briefly mentioned, are two of those areas where we know we will be able to learn more, and we won't be fully understand through just the IPP. And one of the things I'll say though is certainly the FAA does not want to lose the momentum and the progress that we've gained through the IPP. We don't want to see that jeopardized. And so, later this year, the FAA plans to put forward, lessons to apply the lessons learned from the IPP to programs, outside of the IPP, whether that be our PSP partners or others. And we will continue to provide an avenue so that we don't lose that momentum from the IPP program. Otherwise, the FAA continues to work towards its final rule on remote ID as well as ops over people. We have stood up the remote ID cohort to help develop infrastructure and data exchange mechanisms that will be needed along any remote ID policy. And then more long-term, we're looking forward to an eventual NPRM called Mosaic, is a modernization of special airworthiness certification. And that will, start moving towards, as Tom pointed out, the eventual, the FAA would agree in that we don't want to continue exemptions forever, and that eventually we want to move towards rules, from exemptions towards rules to expand UAS use is definitely a goal of the agency. And so Mosaic will be a rather expansive undertaking to relieve restrictions and enhance safety of the integration of manned aircraft and certain of unmanned aircraft and certain manned aircraft into the airspace. We'll look to better align airworthiness certification standards with levels of risk based on aircraft operations, and the rulemaking will be a vehicle to implement a number of the sections of the FAA reauthorization. And certainly there's more to come on that in the future. Meanwhile, the FAA and industry continue to make a number of advancements from the approval of Part 135 operators. We saw the second one in fall of last year, and we have several more pursuing Part 135 certificate, to the fact that we are working with numerous UAS manufacturers that are in various stages of type certification of aircraft. All that to say, the FAA is continuing its work. We have not seen, many impacts to our UAS work, and we continue on and have lofty goals to partner with industry and to continue moving this innovation forward.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Appreciate that perspective. And now we're going to turn over to PK, the father of UTM, for the perspective of NASA and NARI. PK, take it away.
Thank you, Justin and Aiken Gump, for putting up this panel, and I'm pleased to be here with everybody. From NASA perspective, we are continuing our research. In COVID, as you know, the NASA centers are not open, so we are working all from home, just like most of the country here. At the same time, we are pushing forward with the research related to urban air mobility, advanced air mobility concepts, which includes the small drones, electric aircraft, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. We have initiated many work groups related to aircraft, airspace, infrastructure, as well as community integration, and we continue to understand the requirements to mature the urban air mobility and small UAS industry. In terms of some observations, we have seen while the passenger traffic has gone down significantly and the advance bookings have gone down significantly, we have seen some uptake in the cargo operations. In the beginning, what happened was, as the 40% of the cargo travels in the passenger planes, the cancellation of passenger flights also impacted cargo, which impacted supply chain, and some delays occurred, but many companies converted the passenger aircraft to cargo, all cargo aircraft operations, and slowly they build a capacity for cargo traffic, and supply chains are coming back online. So we are seeing some interesting dynamics and the resiliency of the aviation system to support that. At the same time, there's increased interest in pushing forward with the unmanned aircraft systems for cargo, as well as many other applications, informing the public about latest events and the concerns about gatherings and things like that. FAA has been very active working with industry and NASA in trying to figure out what are the best ways to accommodate and allow some of these operations. So number of interesting things have been observed as a result of the COVID situations, and we continue to see now this slow normalization and increases in the passenger traffic, although the number of aircraft that are operating are considerably less. The pressures at one point that we felt in terms of capacity delays have gone down, as well as the pilot shortage. It will come back, but it might take a year or so to get back to that normalcy. So our research, the bottom line is our research continues. We have seen some pressures on the cities to focus on the COVID-related things, so they are more focused and aware of the current situations rather than spending a lot of energy and time for building for future. So there is a little bit of shift in the priorities, and rightfully so. Those are the things that we have seen, but from NASA perspective, we continue the momentum towards research and development and collaboration and understanding the needs. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, PK. Appreciate it. So now at this point, we'll go into some of the questions. And the first one I had, we'll start with Tom Mcmahon. And if anyone wants to opine in after that, feel free to do so. But Tom, I want to get a sense of your overall kind of perspective on the effect of COVID-19 specifically on the industry. You know, we've seen financial devastation, frankly, you know, across the commercial aviation sector, you know, with really traffic and, you know, in certain areas down to less than 10% of what it was. And, you know, that may be starting to come back, but certainly is going to have a lasting effect. And, you know, in the commercial aviation sector, we've also seen some data out there that's showing that it may be till 2022 or 2023 before we see a full recovery back to where we were. But on the flip side of that, we're also seeing a lot of great news stories about UAS being used for all types of really innovative, you know, use cases that reduce exposure, expedite delivery of critical goods, and things that kind of, I think, bring some positive attention to the industry as well. So my question for you really is, will COVID-19 work to overall stall or accelerate UAS integration? What do you think?
Well, I think that, as I mentioned, AUVSI haven't been around now since 1972. We've seen a lot of opportunities and challenges in our nation and indeed around the world during that time. And they've always also provided some real opportunities because people look at technology to provide solutions for them, whether that's to provide more efficiencies or to do things faster or less expensively, different ways that they look at technology to do that. And I think you've seen strides that have been made in aviation as well as ground transportation and certainly with telecommunications having really accelerated during the past 50 years, and that has also happened during times of war and during times of economic challenges. I mean, just look how much now we depend on technology, even though we had a major disruption of the financial sectors back around the turn of the century with Y2K and then followed by the dot-com burst. But since that time, we've become more reliable on telecommunication systems to do our everyday work. And I think we're going to see something like that, too, with unmanned aircraft systems. Even before the pandemic started, we saw just the strides that were being made in things like package delivery and the convenience that was providing. But now it's become essential in areas where people are working from home or for those communities that are susceptible to the coronavirus infections and needing to really make sure that they are quarantining themselves. And that's primarily with people who have existing medical conditions or those who are elderly. And we've seen that many of our member companies are stepping up. They are getting into partnerships with drugstores and other medical companies to make these deliveries, whether they be to small towns or whether they're to senior citizens communities or even to large cities. We have a member that was working with a supplier of medicines back as long ago as last year and doing these deliveries around the Southern California area. And again, it was providing services to an elderly community in Southern California, and they really had challenges getting to the drugstore to pick up their prescriptions. So this was a real service for them, although all these services were provided by this company under Part 107. So there are still a lot of abilities for companies to do these type of deliveries and other drone operations under the current regulatory regime that we have under Part 107. There certainly, as Andrew pointed out, there are great strides being made right now at the FAA to extend that, so we will have the certainty that we need through regulations in order to do these type of routine deliveries in the future.
Excellent. Anyone else have a perspective on that? Is COVID-19 going to stall or accelerate us?
Hey, Justin, this is Andrew at the FAA. I would agree with Tom. I think his perspective is spot on. And as I mentioned earlier, from the FAA's perspective, we haven't seen our work, be reduced by COVID-19. Certainly, a lot of our workforce has gone into a telework state that we're slowly coming out of now. But our work has continued, and we really haven't seen much impact or negative impact. I think public health emergencies, as Tom pointed out, any emergency encourages the industry and communities to consider alternative means of completing tasks and reducing, in this case, reducing the risk of transmission, which, allows for innovation and for the pursuit of alternative means of completing tasks. Not just in the immediate, but in the long term as a society, as we plan for future outbreaks or emergencies, I'm certain we will see advancement and, more communities considering UAS as an option. We expect to see UAS operators applying for Part 135 certificates. I'm certain this has made more than a few think of it as something that they will do at some point rather than if they want to. And more manufacturers are looking to, certify aircraft. There are more use cases being developed. And then in the short term, we have seen demand for drone deliveries increase in places that already had, UAS delivery services. And we have seen new operations emerge, like UPS's expansion in the villages or Zipline and Novant Health, partnership in North Carolina. As Tom talked about, the delivery of medical supplies and PPE. If anything, I think the experience is providing a proof of concept. It's validating that UAS can be at least a redundancy and something that may be necessary in circumstances in the future. And then, through COVID-19, the FAA performed proactive outreach, whether that be to the IPP or PSP partners, to understand if they're pursuing expanded operations, which has allowed us to support, their efforts in a more streamlined manner. We have seen the use of our SGI program, our Special Government Interest process, go up. There's been a number of requests through that process and program at the FAA that we've been able to work with a variety of partners. Generally that's used for first responders and organizations in response to natural disasters or law enforcement events, emergency situations, and we've been able to use that process for COVID. And we continue to see waivers or exemptions, airspace authorizations each and every day. And so I certainly don't think that COVID has stopped the interest of the industry or the work at the FAA. And in fact, we've changed some of our internal procedures and are utilizing technology more ourselves, which I think will allow us to be even more, allow us to innovate alongside industry, moving forward and be more accessible. A couple weeks ago, the administrator hosted a commercial aviation safety town hall. I know PK was talking about the industry as a whole, and certainly as we've seen, airlines retire aircraft earlier than expected, and we've got a number of commercial aircraft that are sitting on runways or taxiways rather, getting ready for eventual use as demand picks back up. We wanted to understand what the impacts were long term to the safety of the NAS. But that extends over to the UAS world. On June 19th, the DAC meeting is virtual. And so I think, we really have not experienced a large impact to the ongoing UAS work. And I would argue that I think, while unfortunate, it'll provide a number of avenues to the industry moving forward.
Excellent, thanks. So I'm hearing overall that while there are some hurdles, we have some optimism that will come out after this a bit ahead of the game. So that's exciting. With that, I'll turn it over to Cliff to continue the questions.
Thanks, Justin. Next question, Jenny, I'd like to call on you. Your work takes you across the spectrum of aviation, but for this question, I'd like you to focus on unmanned aviation. What are some of the most interesting use cases you've been a part of or aware of from this year?
Thanks, Cliff. Well, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, one of the opportunities in the pandemic has been for innovation, which I always note is that the core of the unmanned culture. Some of the great uses have been for inspections, for companies to be able to contract with folks that work for drone base to take care of tasks that may otherwise have to be where otherwise people would be close together. This allows for social distancing. This allows for safety precautions to take place. We have seen a tremendous amount of people take up drones while they've been home. One of our manufacturers in the Alliance for Drone Innovation is DJI, and people have found amazing uses for photography. They've gone from being hobbyists to being able to sell their photographs for online blogs, magazines, and other journals. So the innovations have just been really incredible, and I think that they're just going to continue as people have time to explore their drones and figure out other ways that they can use them.
Thanks, Jenny. Does anyone have a follow-on to Jenny's comment?
Yeah, this is PK. So I completely agree with Jenny. I mean, crisis spurs innovation in many, many cases. There are examples in history, and we've seen increased need for non-touch deliveries and non-touch contactless operations. And I think drones, as well as other automated systems, are becoming important as part of one of the capabilities to help assist in terms of deliveries and monitoring and services that could be provided to the communities.
Thank you, PK. And I'd like to move on to the next question. This is one that's recurring and of interest to the whole community, and this is for Andrew. One of the key hurdles for widespread commercial use of unmanned aircraft remains BVLOS operations, or beyond visual line of sight operations. Where do we stand currently, and what recent progress has been made in this field?
Sure, I appreciate the question. So, first and foremost, there's obviously two hindrances to routine BVLOS. Depending on the use case, you've got mature detect and avoid solutions, and the ability to ensure, safe operations for other airspace users as well as people and property on the ground. And those are the two that the FAA and I know industry continue to try to pursue answers to. One of the foundational principles that our aviation system is built on is the ability for pilots to see and avoid. Additionally, there are statutory requirements for aircraft operators that are conducting air transportation. Right now, as has been discussed, Part 107 does not allow for everything under the sun, including BVLOS exemptions for UAS that are completing for higher operations. That means that the operators might need to consider their operations in a different manner. But we have seen that drive partnerships like the Novant Health partnership, where Novant Health is the operator and they're using UAS from another entity, Zipline, or the operations need to occur through Part 135, and we've seen that take off. And as I mentioned, there are a number of folks looking to pursue Part 135 and obtain the necessary economic authorities. But overall, I mean, for all operations, BVLOS ops require exemptions from 91, 113. And I know the industry is making a lot of progress, and that companies in the FAA's PSP like Excel, BNSF, and Florida Power and Light are making headwinds on linear infrastructure inspections. But the advancement is definitely, we continue to inch along, and we need to ramp up that progress. While the IPP continues, and we've received a lot of really good data and seen broad success, as I mentioned, BVLOS is definitely one of the areas that we want to pursue, along with our partners, even more than we are now. The last thing that will be able to get us to BVLOS in a much quicker time period and more routinely will be advancements in certification of UAS. that'll allow for exemptions to 113, see and avoid, that will become, more routine, if not standard, to those waivers for drones that are type certificated. So all to say, there are a number of ways forward, but ultimately, we do need to still pursue advancements and detect and avoid, and looking out for and finding the way in which we are going to integrate drones into the aviation system are two of the humps that we continue to push to get over.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. All right, and as a follow-on to Andrew's comment, I'd like to call on Tom. Tom, just like for you to address what you see from your membership in the area of detect and avoid. Andrew mentioned multiple times 91-113, see and avoid CFR, and actually detect and avoid. So if you could just maybe share with us some of the most interesting technology you've seen for your membership, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. I think what we're seeing in the industry now is a reliance not just on a single solution, but on multiple sensors that are on the aircraft platforms, and thereby giving the operator a full view of the airspace in which they're operating. So that's some pretty exciting advancements in technology that is taking place. And of course, all that is to enable things like beyond visual line of sight operations. And one thing to keep in mind, if the pandemic hasn't been enough of a challenge for us this year, we are starting to get into hurricane season. And as we've seen in the past, hurricane season has provided a lot of challenges for public safety. Public safety has been able to use aircraft to fly beyond visual line of sight in order to do recovery missions, and also being used by insurance companies so they can do insurance claims over disaster areas. So these are all, we often think about drone deliveries when we're thinking about beyond visual line of sight, but there's so many more applications. Another would be taking a look at utility right-of-way inspections, something also that's very important. So as we develop better sensor technology, is evolving into becoming better ways to operate beyond visual line of sight, which will in turn provide more applications and more benefits for businesses.
Great. Thank you, Tom. And with that, back to you, Justin.
Cool. Thanks, Cliff. The next question, we'll direct this one to you, PK, first, and anybody else, again, can jump in if you'd like. But what's next on the horizon for our national efforts on UTM? We've been talking about how do we get to those advanced operations? Clearly, UTM, robust UTM system is a key element of that. So, where do we stand, and what programs and partnerships are in the pipeline on UTM right now?
Sure, that's a great question. And we continue to make progress on the research related to further maturing UTM, as well as operationalization of the pieces that are ready for UTM. What we are seeing now is FAA is starting its UTM pilot project, UPP Phase 2. They just awarded contracts to 2 sites that will undergo the operationalization and the testing related to the UTM features or the capabilities or the services. So one of them would be remote ID. So we see continuous momentum building towards different services that will augment the capabilities of UTM. That's on the small drone side. We are also taking the UTM paradigm, which is cooperative, digital intent sharing, service-oriented architecture, and different services possibly provided by third parties, towards upper E, which is 60,000 feet and up. So we are looking at basically building similar kind of structure and operational setup for 60,000 feet and up, with number of operators that will be operating in that airspace. So that could be the balloons and high altitude, long endurance UAVs, it could be supersonic in the future, so on and so forth. We are also looking at the urban air mobility, which is 4,000 feet and below type of operations, and expanding the paradigm of UTM towards enabling those operations at the scale that is postulated. We developed something we call as urban air mobility maturity levels, UMLs. And so for example, UML 1 would be just to getting the access to these electric vertical takeoff landing vehicles. But then once we start to scale them, which is roughly moderate density, moderate complexity about UML4, we would need a different type of operations, and the UTM construct seems to be very promising to support those operations. So on one hand, we are seeing operationalization of UTM. On the other hand, we are seeing increased use of UTM type construct at different parts of the airspace. So it's very exciting to see how the airspace operations in collaboration with FAA and industry are likely to change so that we can maintain the momentum towards increased complexity, density, and diversity of operations that are coming in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, PK. Appreciate it. And it looks like we have time for just about one more question here. So I'll direct this one to Jenny first. And, we've been talking a bit about how do we get to more advanced commercial operations with UAS, but there's a large and rapidly growing segment of the aviation world focusing on urban air mobility, or as now we're referring to it as advanced air mobility. And based on a number of fairly recent market studies, heavy government investment in several research projects at NASA, and also strong industry progress, it seems as if we've kind of moved away from the question of whether or not the concept of air taxis and air metro is real and onto how do we actually make it happen. But with any market, with such technical barriers and lengthy time horizons as the advanced air mobility market, it's going to be highly susceptible to economic downturn. So we've seen that certainly in the commercial aviation sector, and a lot of the companies are funded, very much with the larger aviation companies. So my question, Jenny, for you is, what do you see as the health of the UAM industry right now post-COVID-19, and where do you see that heading?
Thanks, Justin. I think that's a terrific question. What I think we're seeing in the industry and in many industries right now is a weeding out of folks who may not have the investment to stay for the long haul, and the companies that already made the decision that they were going to be in it for the long haul, willing to stay in with their investment. I think that the pandemic has shown the appetite for advanced operations in the U.S. I also think that from the federal government's perspective, supporting the infrastructure for these advanced operations for UAM is also going to be a competitiveness issue, and we are going to need to attract companies to invest in urban air mobility in the U.S. So I think for the companies that are in it now, staying in and working with the government is going to be a great opportunity for us. And I think that really, no pun intended, but really the sky is the limit for advanced operations. I think people are going to be looking for different ways to move around to get goods and services around their communities. We're also going to be looking for greener ways to get goods and services and move people around. And with all of this in mind, I think the other layer to this is going to be, what does the future of work look like? And will people be moving around during the day as much as they used to? And will this give an opportunity for us to rethink the way that the airspace is used, the way that our roads are used, the way that airports are used, and what defines an airport? And all of this is going to go into the viability of urban air mobility. And again, I think that the companies that have invested in this, that are staying in it, should and will be part of this conversation. And the federal government should be there, and I am sure they will be there to meet these companies and figure out what the future looks like.
Thanks, Jenny. And anyone else have anything to add on that?
I think Jenny made some really great points about how after this pandemic, the way that we work and we live, we go about our everyday lives could be a bit different, and the way that we want to have goods and services delivered to us is going to be different as well. One thing I was really pleased to see about advanced air mobility is how it's now being adopted by the military. And there was a conference recently called Prime Agility, in which the Air Force and through AF Works was talking about how the Air Force is looking at these systems for primarily delivering cargo, but eventually could be used for delivering personnel as well. And I think again, looking at a perspective from someone who works for a trade association that was started at an Air Force base, we've just seen the advanced work that's being done by the military and how that then is transferred over to the private sector and to businesses, and how that technology is being adopted by first being originated for military purposes. So I agree with Jenny. I think there is a real optimistic look at advanced air mobility and the technology. And again, I think people are just looking in times of challenges for technology to provide the answers to them. And I think urban air mobility or advanced air mobility is one way that they're going to.
Perfect. And Andrew, question, follow up to you on advanced air mobility as well. This is something where FAA is seeming to get much more serious about advanced air mobility, but up until at least a couple months ago, there's really only one person at FAA working full time on this particular issue, and I know that that's expanding a bit. But can you give us a little bit of insight about how FAA is thinking about this and progressing as this becomes more and more prevalent in the industry?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I think first and foremost, I would say the FAA agrees in that it's a question of when, not if. First and foremost, I think that the first thing I would say is several years ago, the FAA stood up the Center for Emerging Concepts and Innovation within our aircraft certification office. They're one of our, obviously we've got our AUS office that is, the hub of all things drones and unmanned vehicles within FAA's construct. But one of the things we're seeing more and more of, and what will lead to much broader use of a new technology like air mobility platform, is the FAA understanding the innovation that's occurring within the industry. And so this center within aircraft certification allows us to stay up with and anticipate where industry is going, and we've seen their work continue to tick up as it pertains to certification projects of these large UAS, and so a number of their focus continues to grow as industry continues to put more and more ideas forward. And right now, I mean, we have a number of type certificate projects in the pipeline.
Excellent. And PK, I know you've already mentioned AAM, in your earlier comments, but NARI is obviously so intimately involved in this industry and is doing so much work on this. I figured I'd give it to you to close out the discussion on advanced air mobility with any of your closing thoughts.
Yeah, so the NASA Aeronautics Research Institute, which is the arm of NASA Aeronautics, we are basically seeing continuous interest increase in the cargo, as our previous panelist mentioned, and electric vertical takeoff landing and the drones become very interesting apparatus in that cargo missions because they are quieter than helicopters. They can reach to places where other conventional aircraft cannot. So that allows us to basically look at entire aviation in a different manner. So there are a lot of interesting research issues will pop up as a result. So spectrum is one of them. Airspace management is another one. A battery is another one. The whole supply chain ecosystem and maintenance, repair, overall network is another one. This COVID actually has taught us that we need to be very agile in bringing value to people and the society through aviation. And in order to get there, we have lots of research that need to be solved, and we are basically undertaking all that, and we will be working very collaboratively with our partners like FAA, DoD, DHS, but also tightly collaborating with industry to address those needs. And we're looking forward to building this next future aviation.
Thank you very much, PK. Well, I think that kind of takes us to the end of our time. Again, on behalf of Jennifer and Cliff and myself and everyone at Aiken Gump, I want to thank all four of our panelists very much for taking the time to join us today. I know it's a little different doing all of these types of events that we would typically do in person and doing them online, but I think this went very, very well, and I think all of the attendees will have really benefited from your insight with this. Cliff, any other closing remarks from you?
Briefly, Justin, just would like to remind everyone to keep your eyes out for our Advanced Aviation Update, our monthly unmanned newsletter, and then also to invite you to our next webinar. The topic there is going to hopefully coincide with our borders and skies opening up, and that's called The Future of Global Unmanned Aviation. Thank you, Justin.
Yep, and then the third and final installment of this series will be taking place on Wednesday, July 29th, and that will be taking a deeper dive into advanced air mobility. So keep an eye out for an invitation for the July 15th session. That's where, as Cliff mentioned, global aviation. We've asked Cliff to call a bunch of his friends from his time at ICAO and the World Food Program, and we think we've got a great program for that session as well. Again, thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join. We appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks so much.